So many different fitness gyms now. By far, we will be the best.
Catch new episodes of The O Show for free, available on all audio platforms including Apple, Spotify, TuneIn, and iHeartRadio. For full video versions of the podcast, head on over to YouTube and StarWorldWideNetworks.com. The O Show is presented by Mayweather Boxing and Fitness. Mayweather Boxing and Fitness is an inclusive, high-intensity fitness experience developed by the champ Floyd Money Mayweather himself, the best group boxing workout in the market, Mayweather Boxing and Fitness.
You guys still have to follow like a certain protocol?
No, not
well,
really.
I'm in the UK, so like there's all kinds of crazy stuff. Like, you know, the US border's still not open to anybody, so like I'm staying over here kind of until that happens. But I've been back and forth to the States 3 times this year, and then I went to Italy the other day. And you know, every time I come back here, I have to quarantine for 10 days.
Oh, that's
plus take 3 tests here and a test back and forth and stuff like that. So I've tested negative for COVID about 400 times this year already.
Have you ever gotten it?
No. Oh, well, the ironic thing is I think I'm patient 0. I left China with a cold on December 9th, 2019, brought it back to the States, gave it to a number of people in the States, and then gave it to my girlfriend, who then took it to the UK. And then I went out on tour with Slipknot and got another cold in Milan, Italy, where it was like mostly affected in Europe. So yeah, if anyone asks, I'm patient 0.
Oh my God, that's a lot, dude. That is a lot. So are you guys still touring with, the bands you guys were with?
Yeah, I mean, we're all
together.
Yeah, we're all roadies for bands. That's kind of our background. So me and DIAZ have a Fall Out Boy tour coming up starting in about a month, where it's Green Day, Fall Out Boy, and Weezer and the Interrupters. Right. And then I think Warren has some work coming up too. Yeah, the Slipknot stuff starts again. They're in the studio right now. But the summer in the U.S. starts, I think August 11th or something like that, with a handful of festivals. They do a headline run, and then I think there's Knotfest Iowa, and then a whole bunch of makeup dates and stuff like that spans from 2022 until the end of time, essentially.
Wow. So you guys obviously just came out with the first EP, just to get right into it. How did the 3 of you meet? Like all 3 of the bands you guys tour with kind of just merged? You guys were able to hook up? You guys are, again, like brand freaking new.
Yeah. This is our second EP that came out about a week ago. Our first EP came out about 6 months ago. We're just putting out, pushing the music out. But I think I first met DIAZ back about 13 years ago on a tour. I was teching for a band called The Matches. He was with a band called Motion City Soundtrack. We were sharing stage right together. And then a few years later, about 6 years ago-ish, maybe more, I met Warren when we both started working for Linkin Park. And that's when me and Warren kind of started jamming and writing together. And then we all went to work for Fall Out Boy, and DIAZ joined our band as the bass player.
Oh, my God. So you guys have known each other for a long time then?
Yeah.
Yeah, it took getting like all of our schedules kind of on the same page for us to kind of start doing this, like where we can be like, oh well, we're all working for the same band at the same time, so like all of our off time is the same, so we can do all this music stuff of our own in our off time.
Well, hello COVID. That definitely
it helped us get all our ducks in order to then actually put out the music that we've been working on.
So how long have you guys actually been working on material? Like you guys have said, you've known each other for a while.
Yeah.
Just haven't had the time to actually like sit down and gather everything.
Well, it kind of started back in, so when me and Warren were working for Linkin Park, I was Brad Delson's guitar tech. And weirdly, which is not a normal thing that happens, he got sick and I had to cover for him playing lead guitar for Linkin Park. And that kind of made me, it gave me the confidence to be like, well, I don't know, maybe I can write songs. And I knew Warren was a drummer. We started jamming. And from the beginning, it was like, this is this is pretty not bad. This is good. This might even be good. And so yeah, we've been kind of working on stuff since roughly 2015. It was kind of a slow kind of build. And at that point, I was kind of playing everything except drums. But then when after Chester's death, me and Warren were working for Fall Out Boy, and that's when we were like, Diaz, yeah, you're on the same schedule as us. Like, you're our bass player now.
And Brian had just moved to Los Angeles too at that point.
Yeah,
so you're around all the time. You're in, bro.
Yeah, that actually helped quite a bit. I mean, we still could have done it remotely. I mean, we sort of do it remotely anyway. Like, especially like the beginning of COVID, like I was recording from home. Ben was recording parts of, stuff from home too. So like, it's possible to do it remotely. It's just not possible to play shows remotely. Not yet.
How quickly
do holograms?
All that stuff, like over Zoom, doing stuff remotely? Because I feel like that's got to be 10 times difficult, considering I don't think anybody knew how Zoom worked when we started it. Like I feel like I'm a master at this now. I had no idea how to do this like 10 months ago.
Yeah. You know what's funny too? Like
sending tracks all over the place, like for years and years. You'll go to a studio, you'll do one session in one studio, and then you'll email files or FedEx a hard drive somewhere or whatever. So that element of it wasn't really like super new or whatever, but just like a format like this where it's like, yo, bro, what do you think of this part? Or did I comp these drums properly or whatever? Like, that element of it, didn't take so much getting used to, but it was definitely new.
I mean,
it's more time consuming to do it that way. Obviously, like if you're in a studio together, you do a take and someone could be like, well, maybe we'll do this way or whatever. So like I would record stuff and I would send it to Ben, and Ben would be like, oh, can you just like do that? And it's like, it is a little bit of a delay in getting it done, but it's possible to do it, and people like Warren said, people have been doing that for years.
I mean,
we just didn't do it over, we weren't like sitting there on Zoom with each other, watching each other like do our takes. But
15 years ago, the band The Postal Service won that. They didn't even know they were preparing for COVID, and they perfected the process of mailing hard drives back and forth.
Right.
So what's been the most difficult aspect of doing it remotely then?
I think when you're jamming together, you just get a better vibe. Like you can kind of just get a vibe and an idea, and it's like, oh yeah, let's work with that a little bit more. You get a little more when you're on a room jamming together. You get more happy accidents.
Yeah, there's more spontaneous moments where you're like, ooh, that was cool. Like keep doing that. I mean, I might sit at home and play a million riffs and record little bits and pieces and forget about them. But if I'm in front of these guys, we might be like, oh shit, that's a really cool, like, just throw that into the mix somehow,
Something that you might think is dumb in the moment, somebody else hears and is like, yo, do that again. And so those are the things that you tend to lose.
So when it comes to your guys' inspiration for your type of sound, like, because you guys, again, touring with all these big, great, successful bands like Fall Out Boy, Slipknot, Corey Taylor is amazing. I've talked to him a few times. Insane mind for, creating lyrics and writing stuff. Guns N' Roses, obviously, band of the 80s, like Linkin Park you mentioned, Chester Bennington, one of my all-time faves. Like when it comes to, taking bits and pieces from other people and creating and molding your own style, what were some of the bands that inspired you guys to create your sound?
I mean, in our songwriting process, I kind of tend to come up with like the riffs first and then bring it to the rest of the band. And I mean, I'm a sponge for like anything that I'm around at the moment. Plus our music is very guitar riff oriented. So I get a lot of inspiration from like just 90s alternative rock. But like, yeah, I can hear like, especially in the earlier stuff that we wrote when I was working for Linkin Park, I can hear that influence all over the stuff, even if it's not super obvious. I also have become really good at completely ripping stuff off but changing it enough that you can't tell it's ripped off. You don't know that this is secretly a Van Halen song because it sounds nothing like Van Halen.
Well, now I know.
Yeah, but you don't know which one.
But you're gonna search for it now. You'll be like, oh, now I know what that is.
Yeah.
Well, that's an interesting way of looking at things.
Yeah, wow. I mean, it's hard to not take in a little bit of what you're around. Like I did a short tour with Stone Temple Pilots, and just being around, and as a bass player, being around Robert, he's such a great bass player that like after the tour, I was sitting around like learning his riffs and stuff, and I'm sure that had some sort of influence on what I was playing later or what I was, things that I was bringing to the table, just because I was like, wow, I'm like, that's really cool the way he does this or does that. And it's hard to like, when you're around so many like really good musicians, it's hard to not pick that up, you know?
Now, do you think it's more beneficial for you guys? I mean, obviously it is in a lot of retrospects, but, you know, being around all of these great, you know, successful musicians that obviously have a great mind for not only their music, but the industry as well. Do you think that that obviously benefited you guys hearing that and learning from those experiences as opposed to just, you know, taking from what you knew, listening to music and creating it on your own? You know, like, do you feel like getting to know some of these people who have obviously made it big time kind of helped mold you guys into what you're trying to do moving forward?
For me, one of the sort of, I don't mean this in a shitty way, one of the biggest inspirations was kind of realizing that a lot of musicians that I work for are just kind of like mediocre musicians, but they're really good songwriters. Because I used to think like,
which ones?
Let me make a list and I'll top 10 list. No, but just realize like, oh, you don't have to be like, for a certain point I thought like you have to master the guitar and then you can write a song. And it's like, oh no, you can just be pretty good at guitar, and songwriting is a different muscle, you know? So I found that very inspiring once I kind of being around, you know, a lot of these people.
Yeah, I learned a lot about what not to do. Like, you know, if you have like, you know, you sit in a studio all day and you watch somebody struggle through take after take after take after take and just not able to get it, or you got to go, you know, work a bunch of Pro Tools magic in order to make things work or whatever, you kind of like, you're like, okay, well, that didn't work for this guy. It's sure as hell not going to work for me. So let me try to, when it's my turn to do that, let me do my, you know, circumvent things a little differently.
Yeah, you get to be around the process a lot more when you're working for musicians in and out of a studio. So you kind of see how like what works and what doesn't. And you know, like I've been in other bands before too, but just like constantly being around music and constantly seeing how different people approach their recording or their songwriting. It definitely, you take all that in, you learn from all that. Just, and you know, outside of your own personal experience, you know. Yeah,
you're kind of like a sponge, kind of like a fly on the wall when it comes to those things. But at the same time, you have your own style. Like you totally said, you know what not to do.
Yeah.
As opposed to just being like, okay, this is how they got there. That's got to be, you know, the recipe. You know, like everybody has their own thing that's going to get them somewhere.
Yeah, you learn a little bit of everybody's sort of craft. You know, like just being a Fall Out Boy writing great, you know, 3-4 minute pop songs. It's like, oh, you kind of see like a little bit of how their formula works, and that seeps into your brain a little bit.
And I think when like someone gets as big as someone gets, whether it's a Fall Out Boy or a Linkin Park, I think, you know, with Ben, what you were saying before, like you could be a mediocre musician but a great songwriter. I think Kurt Cobain fits that bill. I think he was not the greatest musician, guitarist of all time, but obviously wrote kick-ass songs.
I think he was a better musician than he let on to. Like I think it also sometimes it goes with the times too, because it's like, I don't know, like I wouldn't start like a total shredding like band and expect it to be pop friendly, you know, because that's just not what people are listening to right now. Maybe in the 80s that was cool, like you had all the glam metal bands playing like whatever, and I feel like maybe someone like Kurt was probably like he was an okay musician, but played it down a little bit because that was just of the time, you know. That was just like grunge was about not being the best musician and still being able to play and whatever. So that's
they became the #1 band in the world. So.
Yeah, I'm gonna ask you, all these guitars that are sitting behind me right now back there actually belong to Butch Vig, the producer of Nevermind. So maybe I'll go there when I drop them off today, because I just worked on a bunch of them for him. I'll ask him, was Kurt a good musician, or did you have to dumb him down a little bit? You know,
he's like, actually, that's not him playing on the albums, and nobody knows.
That was actually me.
Yeah.
It was all Grohl. It was all Grohl.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He held the glue together. That's funny though. Butch Vig, is he a nice guy? He seems
he
very
is
intimidating.
Literally one of the nicest people ever. I did, so I met him when I did a tour with Garbage in 2016, and he's a drummer for Garbage. So he has, beyond having his own multi-platinum band, has produced all these records that I grew up listening to, and it's like, he has earned the right to be a jerk if he wants to be, and he's not. He's like literally the nicest dude. Like I hadn't seen him in probably a couple of years, and I just went by his house and got the guitars, and he was like chatted with me for a while, just catching up. And like he's that's a quality dude right there for sure.
I mean, you don't want to waste his time. I mean, at that
No,
point,
I didn't either. I had to get out of there. I was like, it's still intimidating, even though I know him. I'm like, this is still intimidating to be around someone who's like had this much influence on popular music. You know, it's pretty.
I mean,
it's a pretty
at that
huge thing.
stage in his career, he's probably, you know, growing up, dealt with people who weren't as
Oh,
good
yeah.
as he was, and then finally got to that point where it's like, I'm not going to waste my time unless you have the exact same, you know, similar mindset that I have when it comes to creating and making music.
Sure.
I've
When
also
you guys first started out, you know, before the three of you found each other and knew that you guys were on the same page, I'm sure you each individually, you know, started bands at a young age and they just didn't work out because the mindset wasn't there. How many times did you guys go through that and like talk about like the adversity that the three of you guys went through individually before, you know, getting the gigs that you got to the point where you guys came together and formulated your own stuff?
Well, for me, who plays guitar and sings in this band, I had never really tried to be in a band before because I just didn't think that I could do it. I know their story is a little different, but this is sort of like my first attempt, other than my 90s alt rock cover band that I had with my friends. That, you know, that was just for fun. But yeah, for me, I was just like, being in a band is dumb. I'm not good enough. I can't do it. And then it's, you know, so far this has worked out pretty well for me. But I know the other guys, they have their band backgrounds different.
Yeah, I was at like, even through like in high school and college, like I was always in like 3-4 bands at a time. So I was just like constantly gigging. Like my brother plays upright bass and he and I were playing jazz gigs all over the place. And so it's just like, I've been in 60 bands in my lifetime. And it was just like, you know, the whole element of like, you know, start a band from scratch, write a bunch of music, release some music, play a bunch of shows, whatever, I mean, is super tiresome. And to do that 45, 50, 60 times, when we approached this, Ben and I, it was like, yo, dude, we got some time off. Let's just like hang out, write some music and see what happens. And like with that whole like not pushing like this crazy element of we want to be super famous immediately, like, you know, that like, you know, took a lot of the pressure off.
Yeah, I kind of had the same experience like growing up. You know, I guess I started really playing in bands in like high school, and it was always like a weird combination. There's a limited amount of musicians in my town. Like, you know, I grew up in a suburb on Long Island, and it was like, okay, every band was a combination of like the same 20 people, kind of like, all right, I'm in this band with this guy, but that's like a different version. It's like you maybe switch one member and it's a whole different band. And you know, that's like how you learn how to play with other people. And then the first band I ever took seriously, you know, we were like, okay, we're going to tour, we're going to do this, we're going to, you know, and you make, you know, you get your bumps along the road where it's like, all right, I have to learn how to get along with everybody in my band. It's like a family, you know, like now you don't really think of it that way until you're not at home, until you're like halfway across the country playing shows and like trying to put out write music to put out a record and all this stuff. So like, that's kind of my learning process for it, was kind of the same as Warren, where it's like, yeah, you know, I've played in like a million bands, but only a few of them really stuck. And those were the ones where those are the real, like learning experiences for me.
Yeah, that's when it was just like strictly about playing music for the love of playing music, right?
Right. Like, and you know, that's what you know, when you do that in high school or like later on, and, you know, nothing that we took too seriously where it was like, we don't even care about recording. We just wanted to play it. That's a different thing. But then when, you know, I was doing bands that were like, well, we have to like put this record out. We need a label to promote it and whatever. I mean, it turns it into a little bit of a business. And that's something that being around bigger artists has taught me a little bit too, like how they approach that. So it's always like a learning experience.
I think it's also given us like the opposite approach to this, where it's like, we just want to focus on songwriting and putting out,
right,
you know, kick-ass tunes. But it's the opposite of like, oh, I don't want to tour and try to make it. Like, we all have really good jobs working for bands that have already made it. So it's like, but if we can parlay that into skipping the early step of like touring in a van and trailer, like, sweet, we got the main support slot on an arena gig. Awesome. I will take that. But yeah, I think it's, for now, it's like switched where it's just like, we love playing together and playing live shows. But it's like, let's just keep writing amazing music and hopefully get that out to people. And then if that dictates, hey, there's a demand for you touring, then we go do that.
So at what age did you guys, because early on you mentioned playing for a bunch of different gigs with a bunch of different people. Like, when did the business side set in? Because, like, as an outsider, like, my brother's a musician, I'm more of just a journalist. I can see it from the outside. People say the business side of music can get really toxic. What have been your experiences with that on that forefront?
I think that I sort of noticed, especially as I got to bigger bands. I mean, when I first started touring, there was one band that was, I was with a support band and they were headlining. And I used to think, like, bands are like, they're just best friends going around to see the world. And this one band they had like a big radio. Yeah, they had a big radio single. And like, I was talking to one of them and sort of realized, like, oh, they hate each other. They just happened to like be three guys that started writing songs together and then like got a record deal and have a song on radio. And now we're just like, this is just our business that makes us money. And as I've seen bigger bands be like that too, where it's like, oh, the band members might not be as into it anymore, but it's their job and they don't know how to quit their job. So, I don't want to see that ever happen to me. But like, I've seen that with bands where they're just like, it's their corporation and they're just figuring out how to keep it going.
The first band that I had that did anything significant, like put out a record or tour, that was in late 90s, like ska punk boom. So it was a ska punk band. And, I was in the band with one of my best friends from high school. I've known him since I was 8 years old, and we're in this band together and we're getting on each other's nerves because we're touring nonstop. And that was the first time I realized, I'm like, God, this is like kind of a business too. Like, we're trying to run this business and we're trying to keep ourselves on the road and keep ourselves paid, which was like a very minimal amount of money, just enough to get by. But, we were luckier than, 99% of bands that never get to do that and never get to even take $1 off of, what they do. They just do it and they lose money because they love it. And we were doing that for a while, and then things got good and we also just got on each other's nerves. And I think the best thing in that situation that could have happened is we called it quits before we hated each other. And I don't want to be that band that's like, oh, like, we're not friends, we just do, this is a business arrangement, like that kind of sucks when you find that out, and it kind of ruins the illusion, kind of kills the magic a little.
And I feel like when everybody realizes it, it's like, you can't really go back to the way it was.
Yeah, and especially when you become like a huge band, it is, a lot of it is business. Like, you think, like, you see like a Guns N' Roses out there making $500 million on a tour. Like, obviously, like, if they hated each other, they would stick it out for that kind of money. Like, I don't think any reasonable person would be like, just leave that on the table,
Well, look at LP. Like, Chester was a very key part of that band. He's no longer here. That money-making machine is still generating an insane amount of revenue for the remainder of those guys.
Yeah, it's a business. It's a company. Your songs are a commodity at some point, and it's like, it's hard to see it when it becomes like less about the art and more about the product, and it's like, there are plenty of songs out there that are just whatever, artists just shit them out, and they're out, they're out in the world and they're popular on TikTok for a week or whatever, and that's it. But there's still an art to that too. Like, if you removed all the business of it and all the whatever, the metrics that people follow, like, that stuff is like, it's still an art. Like, I couldn't write a song like that, and those people probably couldn't write a song the way we do. So everyone's at their niche.
So working for some of these bands, I feel like there's a lot of big egos. Like Axl Rose, right off the bat, I feel like the guy's got a massive ego.
He's fine. He's one of the biggest rock stars of our lifetime.
Right, exactly.
And he's definitely chilled out. He's, you're talking about a rock star who's now in his 50s and is still doing 3-4 hour shows. And if he's who he is, he's earned that right.
Right.
But I've had interactions with him and he's totally cool. Like, he's I'm not saying I'm sitting down with him at dinner every day, but you run into, that you're on this big tour and you see him on stage, you see him around, and he's totally cool. Like, if he's that way to someone else, I don't know. I don't deal with it personally, so.
I also got to a point in my career, like I have worked for some of those people that like F this guy, but I've gotten to a point in my career, working for a band like Fall Out Boy, like everybody in that band just so nice and easy to work for. I'm like,
Right.
I don't want to work for bands that are a headache anymore. I mean, for a big enough paycheck, I will, but like, it's like, yeah, I like these guys because we all get along and there are no egos and it's just easy to deal with. That's where I'm at in my life.
That's a good like lesson to learn that from the artists you work for, how to treat the people around you and how to treat your crew and how to, your fans or whatever. Like I find that like, honestly, the bigger bands, like the really like mega huge bands are generally pretty cool. And it's mostly, I think mostly it's because you're under the public microscope so much that if you do act up, people are going to find out. But you get, kind of bands that get their first taste of fame or whatever, and they're kind of jerk offs. So you're like, I'm in a position now, and I think Ben and Warren as well, like we've worked for big enough artists, we can kind of pick and choose our battles. So like, if I know that someone is notoriously like kind of crappy with their people, I'll just avoid it. I don't need to be involved in that.
Yeah, that seems very kind of, again, like you do it for the love of the music, but at the same time, when you get big and you're making all this money, I feel like it shouldn't be as toxic because you are comfortable, I feel like. You're in the public eye, which is the one thing, like, yeah, if you act up, you're kind of in the doghouse for a while. But
you get canceled these days. That's it. You cancel in a second.
A lot of that has to do with like what age you were when you got famous.
That's
like
also true.
Part of me too is like, man, I wish nobody got famous before the age of 27. Like that seems to be a good cutoff, But you're in suspended animation. Like these dudes who get famous when they're like 19 years old, they're 30 something years old and they're mentally still 19 because they've been handed everything for forever. And like some people are well adjusted, they come out of that well adjusted, and other people don't. I've never had that opportunity. I'm well past that age, so like I think I'm just the person I am now because of the things that like I picked up from here and there. But I could say all I want that I would never treat someone like that, but I don't know if at 18 you handed me a suitcase full of money and put me on TV, I probably could have been a jerk too. Who knows?
It's a lot. You saw it with Cobain, obviously. Couldn't handle it. Billie Eilish was 17 when she got huge, just a few years ago. Very interesting to see what her turnout's going to be 10, 20 years from now,
She seems pretty well adjusted. I have friends who work for her and tour with her, and they're all like, she's pretty down to earth,
Mm-hmm.
So, people like that, hopefully like that sticks, and that's like, I think we were able to avoid those pitfalls because we're around it all the time, so we see how like what, like, again, it goes back to like learning like what to do and what not to do, like whether it's recording or acting a certain way or your attitude.
Kind of good to go back to being a sponge, being that fly on the wall when you guys are at these gigs, not necessarily like learning their music styles, but learning how they behave as human beings.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Taking away what's good and what's not good.
Totally.
So, moving forward with your guys' music, because, to touch on like some of the new, like obviously the Billie Eilishes, the Post Malones, whether it's rock, rap, hip hop, indifferent, whatever. I feel like in today's day and age, and I've talked about this with a few musicians, you guys put out one EP there, one EP here, one EP in the future, as opposed to like a solid record of 12 to 15 songs where you have 3 hits and then 12 other songs that are kind of just there. Do you think like the way of distributing music in that regard, like as opposed to like an old fashioned 12 to 15 song record to, again, just putting out one single at a time is more beneficial?
It's the industry, especially even in the last like 2 years, it's just changed so much because of streaming and Spotify being the biggest, music streaming service in the world. Everybody's kind of trying to chase the Spotify algorithm. Like Spotify is such a music discovery kind of app that you're just hoping like, oh, I hope the algorithm adds my song to this playlist. And when you put out a single album with 10 or 12 songs, you're lowering your chances of, having a runaway algorithmic hit. So I think it's just easier. And nowadays too, people are very much like, what's out right now? What's coming out this week? And you forget about stuff super quickly too. So it's just the way. I hate how music is right now, but it's just more beneficial to release things in snacks rather than a whole meal at once.
Yeah, that's totally like people's attention spans are just because they have access to everything now. So it's like, if you have access to every song you could possibly imagine, like, why would you stick with one thing that, back in the day, like I'd go buy a CD or something that was $15, $16. Like, I better listen to that thing a lot. Like, I think I forced myself to like a lot of music that was probably I'd be like kind of on the fence about now because I had paid money for it. But now it's like, I'm not saying music is disposable, but because people, there's so much out there, like, you really kind of have to put your best foot forward and you say like, all right, we can release these 4 songs and these are our 4 like bangers for this, out of all these songs. And hopefully it doesn't get lost in the mix, or hopefully people just can consume that much. Like Ben said, it's a snack, not a full meal,
I definitely feel like in this day and age, coming out with one hit at a time, a song like you guys have probably written a ton of material, but you've picked, a few songs here and there to put out that you think are the best and that will, be consumed in the best way possible. You were talking about, kind of like the algorithms of putting out songs and, giving them that snack, that little taste of what you guys are becoming. Do you feel like it's a lot? Obviously it's a little bit more difficult in today's day and age putting out music, but like, how do you determine and how do you guys think, a hit becomes a hit? Is it, one person listens to it one at a time? And then there's obviously, the promotional stuff, people will promote it for you. Do you think it's a mix? Like, how do you think, a song, like a hit song, gets to that point where millions upon millions are listening to it?
Yeah, I've thought about this a lot. And just even the past, like, I remember hearing a statistic one time, I don't remember exactly what it was, but sort of saying like a billboard doesn't really have an effect until you've seen it 40 times. So it's like you kind of have this like build up, and I think any song above a certain minimum level of quality can be a hit if it just gets put in front of people enough, and people are like, oh yeah, that. You have like, slowly people they hear it a few times, and then maybe they have some sort of like, they hear it during like, oh, when we were on summer break and it reminds me of this, and people start building emotional responses to a thing. So yeah, I think it's just really about just having something get heard over and over again. There's, a cultural part of it too. Obviously there's certain sounds that, right now rock isn't very out there. People aren't looking for rock. But we've also kind of said, or I've jokingly said, I'm like, we're trying to be the Nirvana of bringing back the Nirvana sound.
That's a great way of looking at it, man. I couldn't agree more. Like, rock's definitely taken a back seat, and I don't know why. Like, this generation's music, not that it's bad. There's some really talented people out there. It's just not for me. I don't know if it's for you guys. Like, if you guys can get into like the modern day rap and pop stuff.
It shifts around. I mean, yeah, I listen to whatever. Like, I'll just, I have to. I feel like I have to stay in just because of what we do for a living. Like, we kind of need to stay relevant as far as like who are the new artists, because like you might just be working for them one day. Like whether it's a pop act or a rock band or hip hop artists, because a lot of them have live musicians that play with them. So like you constantly have to be keeping up with that. And like, is it something that I listen to all the time? No, I mean, I'm pretty set in like what I listen to. So like I always go back to the same stuff, but it's not the most, rock is definitely not at the forefront right now, but it's still out there and it's still alive. It's not completely gone. And there are plenty of rock bands still charting. It's not, people say like rock is dead or whatever, but it's not, it's definitely not.
Well, there's a lot of like rock elements that are also creeping their way into, the modern day stuff. I mean,
sure.
DIAZ's Boy Machine Gun Kelly, Lil Peep. Like Lil Peep was like, some dude who like crossed those two worlds amazingly. And there are a lot of elements of that still around. Are you solely rock? Are you solely hip hop? Are you solely, pop or electro or whatever? I mean, it's just like, no, everybody's, intermingling all of these different styles, and the rock element will never die. But will it get, woven through, every single genre until it's exhausted? Probably.
Right. The question is if there's going to be a giant movement again, like there was the grunge movement or that late 80s movement. Because, like, it's going to take a band like you guys to just blast off and break through that barrier, or it's going to have to be a guy like Post Malone that's going to have to bridge the genres together in order to bring that style back.
I'm still an old dog. I don't want to learn new tricks. I just want the 90s to come back where it's just like maybe one guitar, maybe two guitars, bass, drums, and vocal, and just fucking make some noise and be loud. When you start getting like modern pop elements in, I'm just like, you're making it a little more boring to me.
There are bands out there that are doing that, or doing like 90s inspired kind of, rock, just straight rock bands, or I guess people call them like post emo or whatever. And it's funny because they are just like younger kids. They're like 19, 20 years old playing, and like they're discovering this music as if it was classic rock, which I guess technically it is classic rock. So they're, and it's like me in high school playing like Led Zeppelin songs, you know what I mean? It's like the same gap of time. So like that much time has passed, and now they're like, ooh, this is pretty cool. Like Soundgarden was pretty cool. And like, they're learning to play riffs, or like, they're learning to play like shoegaze pop, like, My Bloody Valentine or whatever. And like, when I hear that, I hear these bands, I'm like, whoa, this sounds like new, but old, and that's cool. I'm glad that it's has that staying power, that it's going to keep coming back, whether it's, and it'll make you feel a little old. You're just like, whoa, like, okay, that was cool 25 years ago, and now it's cool again, and everything kind of goes in that cycle. So whatever.
So what inspired you guys? Like, what kind of resonates with you guys when you talk about, alternative rock? Like, obviously, Ben, you're a Nirvana guy. It sounds like, anyways.
Yeah. I'm trying to think of I was super into Weezer back in that era. One of my favorite bands is the Toadies. Just anything that was like guitar riff oriented, where like that's what, with our band, I start off with like a riff. I'm like, oh, this sounds cool on its own. Now let's build around it.
I was in a Primus cover band in high school. So like,
me too.
So that whole like rhythmical, just like pounding, obviously being a drummer, if the drummer sucked in the band, I wasn't too into it. So it's just like, I got really into Soundgarden and was super, super stoked when Matt joined Pearl Jam at one point. It's just those like percussive elements just kind of got me started in the alternative world, and then allowed me to branch out into other styles as the times progressed. There weren't blast beats in the 90s. So like, I have a feeling that my influences in playing would have been a lot different. There was no Travis Barker really in the 90s. So like, that whole element would have shaped me a little differently had that been what I grew up listening to.
So who were some of the drummers that you were inspired by?
Tim Alexander was number one. Everybody's cop out for that would be Neil Peart. Matt Cameron was a big guy. Dave Abruzzese, before he left Pearl Jam, was pretty amazing. And then, as a kid growing up in the late 80s, early 90s, I worshipped Lars Ulrich until I realized that his whole genre or his whole being is just total bullshit. Like, and Justice for All was like, one of the first records made entirely with Pro Tools, and like, he's sitting there and played just kick drum for like an hour, and then they pieced it all together. And then, I started being old enough to go see Metallica. I saw Metallica and Guns N' Roses Faith No More when I was like 11 at RFK Stadium in DC, and I think it was either Blackened or Damage Incorporated. I don't remember what song, but Lars played the snare drum on 1 and 3 for the whole song. I was like, what's going on here, dude? Can't you hear what this is? So, there's elements of people that I idolized who I then saw or realized that, damn, these guys know what they're doing, or people that I idolized and then I went and saw or learned the tricks of the trade or heard the stories later on in life and were like, wow, it's like miracle this dude is who he is.
It's a blessing and a curse though, because it's like you grow up listening to this stuff before you know how it's really made and how it's put together, and you love it so much, and then you find out like these kind of things like studio tricks or whatever, that you go see these people live once you know better, and you're like, this dude kind of sucks. Like, he's not like, he can't pull it off live. And like, that's like definitely to me was an important element of being in a band and starting a band. I'm like, not that I appreciate the use of tracks and playback and all that kind of stuff. But for me personally, oh, Ben's gone. For me personally, I only want to be able to write music and play music that we can perform live, that we are capable of just pulling off, no tricks, no like whatever. I mean, obviously in studio there are some like things that you do to pull off what you're recording, but everything, especially with knife stuff, is like everything that we do is we're able to pull it off, pull it off live.
It's a shame that Ben's not here anymore, because like in the early stages of knife stuff, I'm a DJ too. I've done a lot of DJ tech work. I grew up in the 90s rave scene and stuff like that. So like I do a lot of DJ stuff as well. And in some of the earlier knife stuff, I was like, yo, Ben, let me do a bunch of DJ stuff on top of this. And we tried experimenting with that for a while. And
some of the old demos have like
DJ sounds and
yeah, because I would get the Ableton stems with Pro Tools stems, whatever, and they'd be like, DJ, what the hell is the It didn't like unmute the track. I'm like, oh, we're not doing that anymore. I guess we're just doing this live.
We experimented with a little bit of that, and we just kind of like took a step back and went, no, we don't want to have all of this, fake, for a lack of a better term, element. We just want to be up there and do our thing. If we want to hire a DJ later, maybe. But we just kind of took that element and just pushed it.
And just to clarify, because some people don't understand the kind of how tracks and playback work. They think it's like a Milli Vanilli thing where you just play a track and it's all fake. But it's really what it is, and tons of bands use it, and your favorite bands too. They use tracks. It's to add, or to when you're performing live, instead of having back in the day, you'd hire like string players and an additional keyboard player just to pull the stuff off live. And now it's like all those elements, things that you can't, reproduce live. Oh, there he is. Now he's on his phone. The things that you can't reproduce live, you're going to use tracks for that. And it's not, to me, it's like not, it has nothing to do with like, it's not fake. It's not whatever. It's just a reality of playing music in the year 2021.
And when everybody's looking for like an excuse to cut tour costs, cut one background musician, you're cutting their pay, their spot on the bus, their flights, their hotel rooms, their spot in catering, their pass, their whatever. So like using a computer, whatever. Linkin Park was spending $75,000-$80,000 on their computer rigs. Even buying something like that is saving in the long run exponential amounts of money by not having to hire 30 musicians to cover all the parts that the computer's able to do.
Now the problem now is that, like, the thing that's gone full kind of the wrong way is that I think a lot of like younger bands see that and think that in order to have a successful live show, you need to have that element included. And I do see like these like bands just starting out with, with their playback, like, rigs and stuff. And I'm like, man, you guys should really learn to pull off as much as you can first before moving on to that step. Don't like base a band around it. I mean, you could, but it just seems so like you've jumped ahead too far when you do that. And
I feel like if you start with that, you're going to get exposed when you play live.
Well, it's just, it becomes, I mean, if that's really going to be part of your sound, then that's part of your sound. But I just feel like some bands are just doing it because they think it's something they need to do. And they feel like they need to like have that thing. And I never, if it came time for us to incorporate that into our live situation, that's fine. I would want someone to run it for us. I don't want to rely on us doing, because like I think we, as a especially as a three-piece band, everyone has to be like focused on the thing that they're doing to fill out the sound and make it as close to like what our recorded material is like.
So out of everything that you guys have written, to come back full circle when it comes to creating the certain sound that you guys want? Is it more, this is what it's going to be, or are you guys open to experimenting with all the material that you've written when it comes to different types of sounds? Like if you guys were to put out a record, each track just sounding the same, or would you want it to sound different?
I'm always looking for you always want to say some sort of evolution to the growth of a band. But when I'm writing a song, I kind of always hear our band as a 2-guitar band. And I'm always adding extra guitar parts just so the song has evolution to it. And, the verse 1 is a little bit different than verse 2. But I still don't, for me personally, I don't see us like in the medium term incorporating, a wildly different sound. I might try to get different sounds by using guitar effects and whatnot here and there. But, at its core, we're a 3-piece. We're a 3.5-piece. We're a 2-guitar band with 1 guitar player. And
I think stylistically, it doesn't really drift too far from a core of, melodic riff-based, kind of have a more aggressive music. It kind of stays in that wheelhouse, whether it's, some songs might be a little more aggressive and other songs might be a little more melodic in that, for lack of a more refined term. But I don't see us like suddenly decide, writing a power ballad. Like that would be real strange,
That'd be funny though.
We could try it. What are you doing later, Ben?
Just writing power ballads.
No, but to kind of go back to, and this will be my last question. I don't want to take too much of your guys' time, but to kind of go back to, taking bits and pieces and making it your own thing. You talk about some of your inspirations. Grunge era sounds like, Nirvana, Soundgarden, Pearl Jam for you guys. Like great music, great sound, obviously inspirational to many, including you guys. But it was also kind of like a dark era, like Cobain's no longer here. Cornell, unfortunately, no longer here. Like you worked with Chester. Unfortunately, he's no longer here. Weiland had his problems. Lane Staley had his problems. How do you guys, again, differentiate, being inspired by heavy grunge metal type music, but at the same time, having your own thing to keep yourselves, balanced and happy, as opposed to like getting into it 100%, diving in full force and, creating kind of a toxic environment?
Yeah, I don't know if I think those bands, what's the right way to say it? I definitely write from a dark perspective. I think that's just more interesting. But you're not always writing about yourself. I mean, the first song on this new EP, Scammers, I literally wrote that about like serial killers and the kind of like a whole thing. I wasn't necessarily writing about myself. But then there are other songs where I am coming from a more personal perspective. But I think we're just finding the examples of, dark and depressed people, which obviously had a lot of massive success. But there are also plenty of examples of like heavy, dark music from people that's not who they are. So I don't think it has to go hand in hand, but it is much more interesting writing from a dark place, heavy music from a dark place, than like happy music from a dark place. I do like stuff that is dark though, that sounds happy. Going back to like my love of, happy might be the wrong word, but I love the band The Toadies. They kind of have like that first album. It was super catchy and enjoyable to listen to, but there was dark shit going on.
Yeah, that's like Motion City Soundtrack, one of the bands that I worked for, I got my start with. They're notorious for having this like pop, upbeat kind of pop punk, pop rock kind of sound with, keyboards and all this stuff. And the lyrics are super dark about, drug addiction and all, just real, like not things you'd be like, man, I'm like bopping around, listen to this. And also like, oh God, this guy needs a hug, that kind of feeling.
I'm mostly responding to what I see around me. I'm not necessarily like writing about how, like my feelings, like how it makes me feel. I'm just taking inspiration from what I see, and hopefully dark stuff. Yeah.
Up until about 3 years ago, I tried to immerse myself in the most toxic environments and self-destructive shit possible. And so this later after getting my shit together, it's kind of like telling the story, the roadmap, how you got through the other side. you know,
Totally.
winning.
There's that version of it too, where you live through it, and then you're like, here's all the dark shit in song form. you know?
Well, I mean, Warren's dark shit has been some inspiration on some of our songs too. Like I'm not happy that he had to go through it, but you just kind of, you're around it and you see it and it's like, okay, like I'm taking little bits and pieces of this and, commenting on it.
I mean, that's very interesting and inspiring because you're able to look back at those dark times from kind of not necessarily a happy perspective, but from a perspective where you're not in that place anymore. Like you can look back and analyze it and actually take a lot of things away from it.
And look at it like an achievement instead of like a you're not reminiscing about how horrible it was. You're looking at yourself now and how you achieved, pulling yourself out of that shit.
Yeah. And then the worst case scenario of that is like a Lane Staley, where like an album like Dirt, it's like, oh, this isn't a retrospective thing. This is like literally happening to him. He's living through this right now, and it consumed him. So like, I don't ever want to be that. I don't want to be a living stereotype of the rock guy who let it consume him. I'd rather someone's like, "Ooh, this is dark." It's like, yeah, but this is a look back on how things used to be, or observational. I don't want to personally live through that, that kind of struggle, whatever you want to call it.
Well, you guys are definitely, taking those experiences, whether it's, playing your own stuff or, seeing what other musicians are doing when it comes to not only like the vibe of the room, but at the same time, knowing how to act in certain situations, knowing how to react in certain situations, as opposed to, like you just said, like consuming everything. Like Lane Staley just consumed what he was writing, what he was singing about, and it just obviously did not end up that well. And you guys are, again, you're going to be writing music, you're going to be on tour with the bands you guys are with. There's going to be a lot of stuff going on. Like you guys are going to be all over the place, like there's going to be times where It's going to get frustrating. It's going to get very hectic. How do you guys kind of, stay level-headed in that regard? Like, what are some of your guys', personal things that you do on the side? Like, Ben, I think I saw you did Krav Maga, or...
Yeah, that's why I was excited when I was able to start going back to that recently. That's been fun. Yeah, doing Krav Maga, punching and kicking things. That's always been good. Last year I was jogging a bunch. But I mean, when we're on the road, especially when we're working, unless somebody's like a musician is kind of giving you a bad attitude, like whatever happens on stage, just don't take it with you. Don't let the mistakes happen again. But just kind of don't take it personally. That's good advice for all of life. Don't take things personally. It's not about you, unless it's about you.
Well, you guys are obviously kicking ass. And where can we find the new EPs? Are they available on all streaming platforms?
Yeah. Anywhere that you stream your music, you can find our EP.
Well, I want to thank you guys so much for being gracious enough to take the time out of your day the last hour or so. Hopefully I didn't take too much of your time.
Good.
Keep feeling it. Have fun on tour this summer. It's going to be a lot of exciting stuff for you guys, a lot of great experiences.
Yeah, it's happy to be out there again.